All right, good morning. Good to see everyone. I know Luke got us going on our study of holiness. We'll get into that in just a moment. I've asked Joseph, if you would, to direct our thoughts.
Dear Lord, thank you so much for this beautiful Sunday morning that you've given us to come gather in your name and learn more about your word and sing songs of worship to you. Please be with Scott this morning as he delivers our lesson, and please be with us to take his words to heart. And thank you so much for the sacrifice of your Son who died on the cross to forgive our sins. In his name.
Amen. Two things tested my resolve this morning. Got to share this with you. Have you ever been running late for worship? All right. Well, so this morning, the cars that I was following were law-abiding citizens. I'll just leave it at that. And when you're out there in the country roads, 35 is 35, so we made it. It gets worse. So leading, singing, and doing what I have to do today, riding in an open Jeep can mess with your hair. I forgot my hat. I had to wear Carolyn's Dodgers hat. So I know some of you, yes, and she snapped pictures all the way. So I'm doomed. Anyway, so I'm working through it. A little bit of anxiety this morning, but we're working through this. Okay, we'll get our Bibles open here in a moment. We're going to look at a lot of passages. I wanted to begin by thanking Luke. I didn't realize he was going to be here today, but I really appreciate the way he launched this class on Sunday. I had the opportunity last night to sit and really listen to his lesson. When David and I sat down to talk about a subject, I mentioned to David I would like to see a subject that's kind of topical in nature. In other words, taking something that we could talk about a lot of things. So David mentioned holiness. He sent me some material. I've kind of looked at it. It was something he used for the high school class. But when I announced anybody who would like to help me with this class, Luke and Grant were like right there. So I'm super excited. I want to emphasize what Luke said too. If there are some gentlemen in here who would like to contribute to this class, feel free to do that. Grant's kind of putting an outline together for us as we follow this and work through this. All right, so real quick 30-second review of last week. I'm not going to cover everything, and I'm not trying to capitalize on anything that Luke said. Kind of setting the tone for the remaining lessons. One of the things he kicked the class off is, what's that classic definition of holiness? And I think, Leroy, you shouted out, set apart. And then Ed, I'm trying to remember the voices. Ed, you came back with the idea set apart for a purpose. All right, I liked your little dice thing up there. That was kind of cool, all right? Here's this one dice set apart, but for what purpose? And so Luke's discussion kind of went into that. He talked about both Isaiah 6, was it Revelation 4? 4, okay. In Revelation 4, asked you to look at what was going on there, and I think what it said, what presents the word holiness in these verses, and you name some of those things off. And then there was that Hebrew word for holy, that I thought was really fascinating. So many things there. Like I said, I don't want to get into too much of what he went into, but I think the bottom line was recognizing that these words and what we see means a separate, right? Separate from that which is unclean. And so that's kind of the foundation of our study as we get into this this morning. Luke, you began your class last week with this statement. I might be off a little bit, but something to the effect of, we want to get an understanding of holiness that will invite us, or a definition of holiness that will invite us. And that just stuck with me. Invite us to what? I'm not asking you right now. This is where we're going this morning. Invite us to what? What does the holiness of God invite us to do? And I think, speaking for Grant and Luke, this is kind of be where we're going. What does God's holiness or understanding holiness invite us to do in our lives? So I want to get the discussion going by going back to Isaiah 6. So if you open your Bibles back to Isaiah chapter 6, and I know Luke briefly touched on what I'm going to touch on, but I want to take this a little bit farther. as he described the holy, holy, holy there, and I thought it was just really wonderful the way he did that, and then also looked at Revelation 4. What I want to do in this reading, if somebody be thinking about who would like to read that, Isaiah 6, 1 through 8, what I want you to be thinking about is how did Isaiah respond to what he saw? And I know Luke briefly touched on it, but I want to take that a little farther. And this will kind of get our direction going. So be thinking about this. Something else I want to mention, I think it was Terry last week. Terry, you made the comment of this is what Isaiah saw, or maybe it was what John saw. And I want to stress that, right? This wasn't like, hey, I had this weird dream. It says, on the death of this king, this is what I saw. And I want us to focus on that. All right, who's got Isaiah 6, 1 through 8? Who wants to read it for us? Yes.
In the year that King Uzzah died, I saw the Lord seated on a throne, high and exalted, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Above him were seraphims, each with 6 wings. With 2 wings they covered their faces, and with 2 they covered their feet, and with 2 they were flying. And they were calling to one another, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty. The whole earth is full of his glory. And at the sound of their voices, the doorpost and the threshold shook, and the temple was filled with smoke. Woe to me, I cried. I am ruined, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips. And my eyes have seen the King and the Lord Almighty. Then one of the seraphim flew to me with a live coal in his hand, which he had taken with tongs from the altar. With it he touched my mouth and said, See, this has touched your lips. Your guilt is taken away, and your sin is atoned for it. Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, Whom shall I send, and who will go for us? And I said, Here am I, send me.
All right, beautiful passage there. So, discussion. How did Isaiah respond to what he saw? What stands out for you here? What is it that yes, Terry.
Whoa.
Okay.
Woe is me.
Do you know this is the only time, and maybe the Bible scholars can correct me, where a prophet addresses the woe to himself? Only time in Scripture. I thought that was interesting. Right? What's happening here with Isaiah? What's his response to this? Right? He says woe, but I want you to get into a little bit. What is Isaiah thinking here? What's going on? He says, woe to me, I am ruined. Jerry.
He says, I'm a man of unclean lips. I'm among a people of unclean lips. He's essentially saying I'm not worthy, but I wanted to quote because I think the unclean is important in our context.
Exactly. All right. So he's acknowledging what? His sinfulness. And what else? The sinfulness in the world around him. All right. So he says to this, woe is me. And I find this kind of interesting that he's not standing there in amazement going, wow, this is the most amazing thing I've ever saw. I'm in the presence of God. Can you believe it? That's not where he goes. He goes right to woe is me, as Jerry pointed out. That's where he... Look. It's instant. All right, so why? Why this instant introspection? I'll get it out, though.
I think it's similar to the human terms. It's like, okay, I sing a fair amount. Yeah, and sometimes I feel pretty good about it. Until I go hear somebody who's a professional and really sings well, go to a concert or whatever, and you go, oh man, I stink. I am just not that. He is a prophet. He has, been put in a position. He's among the people of God. But when coming face to face with the real thing, real holiness, he is suddenly like, no, woe is me, I am unclean. I don't care how good I thought I was before, I am utterly. That's how far above God's holiness really is.
And so that's a reflect. He's acknowledging God's holiness right now, is what he's doing in this reflection of who he is. So we kind of touched on it. So what is he acutely aware of? We just said it, but I want to make sure, what is he acutely aware of at this moment? His sin and the sin of the world that he's living in. That's this holiness, this image, this vision took him right to, this is where I'm at. This is my relationship with God. So what do we see here? We see God's holiness leads us to a sense or an understanding of our sin and should make us sensitive to the unholiness around us, right? This one of the things Grant and I and Luke talked about a little bit was the application that we really want to get into in some of these classes. And so I want to be focusing on that a little bit. But a takeaway for us right here is once we recognize this, once we recognize our sin, all right, we see it makes us sensitive. You know, sometimes we talk about becoming callous to the sin around. It doesn't bother me. Yeah, it just duck, just falls off my back. It should affect us. It should bother us. It should stir us up when we see the sin around us, if we understand God's holiness. So if Isaiah was left just with the guilt of his sin. Let's stop there at verse 5. Woe is me, I am lost, I am a man of unclean lips, I dwell in the midst of people of unclean lips, for my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. If we just stop right there, just Isaiah recognizing his sin, he would be unfit for what God had planned for him, right? He would not be able to carry out verse 8. So let's look at verse 6 and 7. All right, look at verse 6 and 7 again. Here's where the seraphim flies down, having his hand a burning coal, taken with the tongs from the altar. He touched my mouth and said, behold, this has touched your lips. Your guilt is taken away. Your sin is atoned for. All right. What do we notice about God in these verses? What's happening here? You've got this scene of the seraphim, but this is God. What's taking place here? What do we see? Isaiah has acknowledged his sin. Jerry.
Well, God doesn't just say, no, it's okay, you're good enough. He acknowledges what Isaiah is acknowledging and then takes care of it.
Okay. And how does he take care of it? I know we can say, well, he took but what's going on here? Is this God's graciousness? This is God's graciousness taking place here. This is what I want. This is what stood out for me, and this is what I want us to see here. All right, as we look at this, so the idea is what we see about God. He's acknowledged his sin. There's nothing that he can do anymore at this point. All right, Ed.
A couple of observations. One is that he focuses on lips.
Yes.
His job as a prophet is to talk. And so he becomes very aware that his ability to talk, to use language the way he's supposed to, is totally inadequate to the character of God. The second thing is that God doesn't just kind of arbitrarily, he not only doesn't ignore it, like Jared correctly said, he doesn't say, okay, I've got this magic thing. He goes to the altar that he had commanded Israel to use for atonement, and he takes a coal from the altar that he had promised would be able to provide atonement, and then he uses these, indirectly uses these other beings to touch them to this function that was unclean, that was not able to do the things that God had commissioned them to do.
Right.
And that then makes it clean. And so it isn't something that Isaiah does, it's something that God does, and that's the grace point. But it's also consistent with what God had already commanded he would use to be able to cleanse and atone. And so that there's something really beautiful then, that he's aware of the distance between himself and the Lord. He recognizes that it's not going to be, that it negatively affects his function. And then God intervenes using his own, previously commanded circumstances. He intervenes to be able to resolve that issue. And now we can get down to the question, who's going to go do the job?
Exactly. One of the things you said that jumped out at me, he's recognizing the distance. right? God closed the gap. God closed the gap here. When I want to get back to what he said, woe is me, I'm a sinner. This was God, as you pointed out, this was God who steps in, does the very thing that was practiced, right? And says here, and I like your point, I think you're exactly right. The idea of touching his lips was not just arbitrary randomness. He's a messenger of God. So maybe at this time too, Isaiah is recognizing, not only am I a sinner, I don't have the words necessary. God's saying, I'm going to take care of that. I'm going to provide that for you. Now here's a thought that we're probably going to come back to that kind of jumped out to me. The more we understand God's holiness, and I think this is what's helping me, the more I try to understand God's holiness, the more I'm in awe of his amazing grace. I want to read something. This was from a gentleman by the name of Art Lindsay, Holiness of God. He wrote for the C.S. Lewis Foundation back in 2008. Just a little clip here that I thought it resonated with me. Listen to what he says. It is easy to take God's grace for granted, and this is commonly done today. Rather than assuming God's holiness and being amazed by his grace, we take for granted his grace and are amazed and offended by his holy wrath and judgment. Many presume on God's grace by doing that which they know is wrong, rather than being deterred by a fear of his holiness. I like that because just the way he worded it was what I was thinking. So I came across this, I went, that's it. That's what I wanted to put into words here. And just to kind of emphasize what he's saying here, and he goes on to talk about the abuse of grace in the article. But I think he's exactly right. We have this tendency to take God's grace. Here, God's grace. I've got God's grace. And if we're not careful, it becomes a license, or we use it for a license. And then when something bad happens, or we look at something in the Bible, why would God do that? Why would God destroy that? I thought God was a loving God. What he's saying here is we are missing the point. We have to understand God's holiness. We have to understand who God is. Then we can come back and more deeply appreciate God's grace. Carolyn.
I was just thinking for me that them seeing and understand, or Isaiah seeing God's holiness, allowed him to see his own sin, and that took him to the altar of God, because he knew that that's the only way he could become clean.
Right.
And he had to become clean before he could start working on the people around him who he also knew was unclean. But there was one thing he couldn't do himself, and that was to take his uncleanliness and make it clean. He needed the intervention of God. And I think that's when we start to see our own sin, that we allow that to draw us to the altar of God, and then allow God to do his part.
That's right. As the writer says, come boldly to the throne of grace. Exactly. One more thought in here, and then we're going to move on. And this idea here, if we have time, we'll come back to this. I was thinking about this idea of when I'm talking or people about God, and many times we have those conversations. You know, if God was this, he would do this. Why did God do that? I don't believe in God because he's this mean ogre up there. And the more I think about that, the more I think about the importance of hopefully getting a person like this into a study of who God is, because that's really where the issue lies. It's not so much the argument of grace and all those things. It's getting an understanding who is God. Isaiah, as well as John, as Luke pointed out, are showing us this picture or this vision, this actual what they saw of who God is. And we need to hold on to that. Now look at verse 8. We'll keep going here. So I heard this voice, Lord, whom shall I send? Who will go for us? And right there, Isaiah says, here am I, send me. That's a great song, by the way. We haven't led it in a long time. Why does Isaiah now have the desire to go? Go for it.
He is responding to in a way that is just palpable the
that closure of the gap that Ed just talked about, the fact that he just got brought nearer. It's sort of like our response to abundance. When we see people being generous and abundant with things, we feel lifted up to that abundance. And I think that Isaiah is making a response to God about the abundance he just received. He went from woe is me, I am undone. That's the one. That's the first word interpretation I like in capital. I am literally unstringing my muscles. I'm going to melt apart in a moment here by what's happening. To I got it. I'll do it, God. Right? He switches from that to I got this. I'll do it. Send me.
Right.
And it's the response to what he's just received, the abundance he just received from God that he had never done.
Exactly. Well put, Terry.
Exactly. It's what he has just received. It's fascinating to me how he has transferred from a state of impending doom to atone for and saved and ready for service because of God, what God did for him.
And correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think he fully sees what he's supposed to do yet. Wait a minute. Let me read the contract. Right, Grant?
Yeah, he hasn't even been told yet what the task is about to be. But it's also fascinating that he understands and accepts the forgiveness that he has received.
Yes.
And now says, now I am qualified to be, in God's name. I'm qualified to be here because you made me qualified. And isn't that the problem that we have so often? Oh, yeah, I understand, I've been baptized, I understand that God forgives me, but I still feel undone so often, so inadequate to the task. When God is telling us over and over through the scriptures, no, you are qualified. I'm not sending you out quite like Isaiah is being sent out, but I'm sending you out to a task, and you are absolutely qualified for it.
Exactly. This reminds me, too, of this idea of being unworthy. This word keeps popping up in my head. He recognized his unworthiness, right? And even though he still believed that, he trusted God to do these things. Ed.
Yeah, it's a different angle on the same kind of thing, but being brought into the presence of God, and I'm thinking of Psalm 29 that Luke asked us to read for today. This is the God whose voice breaks open the universe. I mean, he cracks the wood and does just... The idea that we could arrogantly say, I'm not going to do what needs to be done. It reminds me of the Israelites not wanting to go in and take the land after God said, I'm going to be with you, do this thing. There are so many times in my life where I started turning to myself and say, well, I'm not worthy. Well, that's actually kind of an indirect thing. My worthiness is really not what's at issue here. The question is, I'm not recognizing who I'm dealing with.
Right.
Not just is God able to do this for me, if God has something to be done, and he's the center of the universe, and I'm just a creature, and he's a creator, I'm not authorized to quit. I'm not authorized to say, I'm not going to go. And once I got that in my head, it transformed a guy who, could do a couple of things to whatever God puts me in a position to do, here am I, send me. It's not just one feeling worthy. In fact, in my experience, that's really not what it was at all. I never felt worthy. I still don't feel worthy. That wasn't the problem. The problem was unclean lips. The problem was God is so great. Well, if God is that great, when I finally get that, then I go, here, whatever you want. I belong to you. I'll be crucified with you in baptism. Everything I have is yours. Do with me as you want. That's the transition that every Christian goes through because of the holiness of God in Christ.
No, exactly. As you were talking, it made me think of when we understand this, and I still struggle with it. I still struggle with this. Maybe you do too at times, but it really removes the whole idea of self in any level of service to God. Completely removes it. As you pointed out, what do you want me to do? Here I am. I will give my very best based on the talent or whatever you have given me to do. I think there's so many lessons in this that we could look at. But I think that's a very powerful point, that at no time do we really, if we do feel worthy of something, I think that's a red flag. Let me just put it that way. Boy, I'm worthy of this. there should be a little red flag popping up because maybe we're beginning to miss something there. And maybe in some of our discussions, we'll get into that a little bit more. So let's do a quick review of what we just talked about. So at this point, was Isaiah holy? His lips were. But was he made holy, yes or no? Yes. I believe emphatically yes. All right, at this point, when he says, "Here am I, send me," God can only send somebody who God deemed worthy. I'm being careful with the word there, all right? Who God deemed, all right? So yes, he is holy. He has been set apart. His sins have been removed, all right? We've already talked about this. We've talked about how he became holy or what God did to bring Isaiah into his presence. Next question. Do you think Isaiah understood more clearly his holy relationship with God? I'll answer that for you. Emphatically, yes. All right, so kind of keeping that in mind, let's move on. And I want to direct our focus on this question of why we must be holy. And I don't think that's just a softball question that we throw out there. I think it's something really worthy some reflection. And there's no way we could probably even cover this in 13 classes. We're going to do our best. But I want you to go to Hebrews chapter 12, verse 14, if you would, for a moment. Somebody get ready to read that. I know I'm just kind of pulling a verse from the middle there where the writer here is talking about just staying strong, lift up your hands, make straight paths your feet. You know, he's just giving a bunch of instructions there, all right? Godly, holy instruction. But I want you to notice verse 14, all right? Hebrews 12, 14. Who's got it? Who wants to read that for us real quick? Yes, Seth.
Pursue peace with all people and the holiness without which no one will see the Lord.
All right, just going to pause there for a moment. Pretty straightforward. What's the message in that verse? What does it mean? What do you see? In that verse that Seth just read. All right, let me go back to it. All right, there in verse 14. Strive for peace. I'm not trying to take this out of context, but I just want to focus for the holiness without which no one will see the Lord. What is the writer telling us there? What's the message? Carolyn.
This may not be what you're looking for. So.
I'll let you know.
But without which no one will see the Lord. I love that part. I think it connects to Isaiah where the seraphim have their face covered, they have their feet covered. That makes me think about Moses in the burning bush, where he wasn't allowed to look at God and he had to take his shoes off. And that there's something about not seeing God and your feet being bare that were connected to holiness in the Old Testament.
Yep.
But without being holy, you cannot be in the presence of God. You have to be clean, 100% pure to be with God. And that is, I think, a really important part here that a lot of people in the Old Testament weren't able to get to.
Right.
But we can be in that state right now, and I think that's where we understand God's grace. We understand his compassion, his love, when we connect with his holiness, and that should bring us peace.
Right. Right. So the seeing God here, I that's kind of what I had in mind. Is he just talking about being God's presence on the judgment day? Is that all he's talking about here? Just you will not see? I think that's true. Right? But I think it comes back to what Carolyn's saying. The idea of, yes, Wes.
It also says strive for it. And if we're not careful, one, we might say, well, holiness, that God's holiness is so far above anything I can do, I can't achieve it. Holiness is just something I can't do. Well, it tells us, first of all, to strive for it. But the strive means it's something we have to work at. It's not something that comes easy. And so, we need to avoid, one, the temptation to say, I just can't do it. No, we can do it with God's help, but it takes work. It takes concerted effort. It's something we have to be intentional about.
It kind of forces the response, here am I, send me, as you were talking. But that, I think you make a very powerful point. We do, it's so far I can't. God's saying, yes, you can. We'll talk about that some more. Ed.
The idea that God created us in his image and has a plan before the foundation of the world for us to be holy and blameless and love through this adoption that we have in Christ gets to this point of why this is important. This peace and this sanctification or holiness, these two things that we're to strive for are essential to our whole purpose in creation. That they're not just kind of a nice thing for the day of judgment. Long before the day of judgment, we are part of God's creation, created in his image to do a job in Christ. Christ is the only perfect human, and therefore he's the model of what we're about. So that our process then of seeking after this shalom, this peace and prosperity, that's coupled with this character of God, this holiness, this is not just a thing in life, according to that verse. This is the core of the center of life, which is very interesting. We're not Christians because of what we're going to get out of this. We're Christians because this is what he created us to be.
Exactly. And that's where I want to go with this. I'm going to come back. Yeah, Carol.
I was just going to say, I see that striving is the part of bringing us to the altar of God, because we can strive for holiness, and without God, we will never, ever obtain it.
Right.
We can strive for peace. Without God, we will never have it. So the striving is going closer to the altar of God and allowing God to do his part in his work.
Exactly. There's a word that I used it in a sermon a while back. It's just a word that kind of helps me with this. When I think of God's holiness, and we'll look at 1 Peter, be holy for I am holy. We had a really great study on that in our Peter class. I remember that. But when I think about God's holiness, and I'm supposed to be holy, the word that comes to my mind is alignment. This is just how my brain works. Right? You may have a different word, but in my mind, I have this idea: is Scott's actions, words, thoughts, responses to things, are they in alignment with God? Now, I want to say yes, I believe they are, and we'll talk later about holiness and, falling in and out of holiness. I think Grant's got some great classes coming for us in that subject. But am I in alignment with these things? These instructions, back to Hebrews chapter 12 that he's given us, are we in alignment with God? All right, so God is holy, therefore I am holy. In other words, there's a nice, I want to say a mix. Right? So let me ask this question, kind of a just name some things that don't mix well. What? Oil and water. What else? Come on, scientists. What else? That's all I remember from science class. What are some things that don't mix well? Gas and a flame. Yes. Gas and a flame. All right. Anything else comes to your mind? Things that don't mix well? Oil and water. Right? No matter, what's that? No matter how hard you try, right? You put the oil and water, and you can sit that blender for how long? And what are you going to get? What did you say?
They're still going to separate.
That's right. I thought you said effort, and I'm like, yes, yeah. There's a lot of effort, but they're still going to separate. Exactly, right? So, my thought is where my brain's going here is, God has given us things that we are to align our life with. So let's go to a couple of Old Testament passages. Right? Somebody get us Leviticus 19:19, and somebody grab Deuteronomy 22, 9 through 11. Right? Who's going to grab Leviticus 19:19 for us? Who's got it? All right, Grant. And then I need somebody to grab Deuteronomy 22, 9 through 11. All right, yes, sir. I forgot your first name. DC. So as we read these, DC, you go ahead and follow. So you're Deuteronomy 22, 9 through 11. So as soon as Grant finishes, go ahead and read Deuteronomy. And the question is, what were these instructions supposed to teach the Israelites? Grant?
Leviticus 19:19. You shall keep my statutes. You shall not let your cattle breed with a different kind. You shall not sow your field with two kinds of seed, nor shall you wear a garment of cloth made of two kinds of material.
Just a random, right? Deuteronomy 22, 9 through 11.
Verse 9 and following. You shall not sow your vineyard with different kinds of seeds, lest the yield of the seed which you have sown and the fruit of your vineyard be defiled. You shall not plow with an ox and a donkey together. You shall not wear a garment of different sorts, such as wool and linen mixed together.
All right, again, we could look at a lot of passages. What were these passages teaching or reminding the children of Israel of?
I'm guessing not to do what the Canaanites are in there doing.
Yeah, right? Elaborate. You're right. What else? Think about what we've been talking about. Yes, Grant.
You go back to the beginning of the chapter. It says, the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to all the congregation of the people of Israel and say to them, you shall be holy, for I, the Lord, your God, am holy. And he launches into this list. So he's teaching them, here's how it's separate.
Exactly. And I probably should have called that verse up, so thank you for doing that. What he's teaching them here is you are a separate people, as Grant just read that verse there. You are holy. These are the actions that separate you from the Gentile, from the rest of the world. These are the actions. Yes, Jack.
I want to add one more verse to this because it just keeps popping in my head. Is 1 John 2:15 and following. Do not love the world or the things of the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the desires of the flesh and the desires of the eye and the pride of life, is not from the Father, but from the world.
Exactly. So there's the connection or the disconnect. Exactly. All right, we've got about 6 minutes here. Let's go to 1 Peter chapter 1, 14 through 16. We'll just kind of camp out there for the rest of the class. All right, 1 Peter 1, 14 through 16. All right, and the question is, what does this verse, I have a lot of verses here, but we'll just take the time to look at one. What does this passage teach us about holiness? Now, we kind of referenced this a couple times, but I want to stay focused. So who's got 1 Peter 1, 15 through 16 for us? Who's got it? Yes, Steve.
Like the Holy One who called you, be holy yourselves also in all your behavior, because it is written, you shall be holy, for I am holy.
All right, so the reason we're to be holy is what? What does Peter say here? Just say it. Because God is holy. This is what we've been saying. This is what we've seen in Isaiah. This is what we see in John, or Revelation. Because God is holy. We are to obey, verse 14. All right, not because the Bible just tells us to do so, and Ed, you were kind of talking about this, but because of who God is. Now, do you ever see, maybe this is just a ridiculous question. No, it's not a ridiculous, I think it's a good question. Do you ever see or notice a tension or a struggle between being holy and obedience? Do you see a struggle for us there, Ed?
Because he talks about our behavior being holy, that obviously involves self-control. It involves an element that is like obedience. There are some people who imagine that being holy or sanctification is a magical state, that it's, Jesus died for us so that if we, push a magic button, we have this magical thing that has no connection to behavior. Other people think that holiness is something that can be earned by perfect behavior. It's clear from 1 Peter that the redemption by the blood of Christ is essential, so that both of those extremes are a problem. And so it strikes me that we can have a problem with the relationship between obedience and our being like God, our being separated, in two different extremes, by thinking of it as magic or by thinking of it as something that we as humans can earn. And it's really kind of I would say it's in the middle, but it's neither of those two things. I don't know if that's where you're going.
Yes. Exactly. What I had in mind here, my answer to this is yes, it's a struggle. There's some tension there. And the tension that I feel sometimes is that obey because I'm supposed to, obey because of this, rather than I obey because of God's holiness. So and I'm going to talk, we're going to run out of time, so maybe on another class I can finish this, but Carolyn, please.
Thinking that sometimes obedience is hard, and sometimes obedience is confusing. Maybe sometimes there's tensions and struggles with obedience, but that's like where the holiness comes in, but it
That's where I was going with this. Luke?
I love that. And if we can reason backwards, if we're holy because he's holy, like Isaiah, we will be drawn toward action of obedience. And it even says in verse 13 that we didn't go do, therefore prepare your minds for action.
Right.
Being sober-minded, being obedient, called as holy like the Lord is holy. Right?
Right.
So Isaiah in reverse is what's happening here. The action, call to action in verse in 13 is then redoubled down by the be holy as you're holy.
Exactly.
In Isaiah, he sees the holiness and then rises to it and then is ready to go to action.
Right. That's the connection. That's where I was going. Yes, Grant.
I think we have a great example of that, even of Jesus Christ, because in Hebrews chapter 12, it says, who for the joy set before him endured the cross. You know, I pointed out before that Jesus is the only person who lived life after having seen what it was like to be with God. And he said, you know, Lord, glorify me with the glory I had with you before the world was. You know, he was able to endure this life and endure the cross because he had seen firsthand the holiness of God. He'd been in the presence of God and knew it was worth it.
Right.
You know, I so much want to get back to that I will go through whatever God has designed for me to go through. You know, whatever the plan is. Now, he knew the plan was. It was his plan too.
Right.
But, you know, there's the example. So if I can, you know, look at Isaiah, who saw a glimpse of it, John, who saw a glimpse of it, and Jesus, who lived in it before coming here, you know, I understand in some sense what level of obedience, what I should be willing to do to get to be there.
Right. Right. We got about 2 minutes. We got about 2 minutes, right? Am I right? Okay. He said one. Right. I'm taking two. I'm just kidding. So God's commands. Here's just to kind of leave this. God's commands are reflective of his nature. In other words, God's commands are not arbitrary. Right? We could do a big study. They're not just, well, everything connects to his holiness. So if I was to list God's attributes, and I'm curious in your thoughts, if I say God is merciful, if I say God is just, God is forgiving, God is holy, God is faithful, God is powerful, I could scripturally support that, right? Absolutely, right? My question is holiness an attribute of God, or is it descriptive of God? And with that, if anything, give that some thought. Carolyn and I talked about that in the noisy open Jeep this morning. And I'm going to give you my answer, what I think it is. I think holiness is descriptive of God. In other words, I don't make a list, oh, he's good, oh, he's holy. Holy encompasses who God is. That's my thoughts, so that'll give you something to think about, and whoever of you are picking up next Sunday, there you go. All right. Thank you for your participation. I appreciate your comments so much. Thank you.